Thank you all for coming together to celebrate my wife's birthday. In our family, this has become an annual tradition. Today, we've prepared some steak. By the way, I got some top-grade meat for my wife and son, said my husband John with a smile during our family dinner. He seemed to have prepared a fancy barbecue for today, and the table was lined with meat. Everyone smiled, drawn in by John's happiness. However, I was the only one frowning, my brow furrowed. Premium steak as an annual tradition. This was news to me. I was just thinking about this when a glass of ice water was placed in front of me, packed to the brim with ice. "Mom, here you go. I prepared it today," said my son Joaquin, bringing the ice water. It looked like a perfectly normal scene, but the relatives had questions in their eyes. That's because Joaquin had purposely moved all the meat in front of me aside, made space, and placed the ice water there. Joaquin is such a good boy, preparing water for Mom. But if you move the meat, Mom can't eat, can she? Today is Mom's birthday, so Dad has prepared some really good meat. Joaquin, eat lots with Mom today, my in-laws said, addressing the lone glass of ice water in front of me. Looking puzzled, Joaquin said, "Huh, Mom always just has water on her birthday. That's normal. Dad always says so." None of the relatives could immediately understand what Joaquin said, but my husband's face clearly changed color. This single glass of ice water would lead to a lifetime of regret for him. That was certain. "Hey, Joaquin, what do you mean Mom only ever has water? Can you explain that to Grandma?" My mother-in-law asked amid the confused silence of the relatives. Unperturbed, Joaquin began to describe the usual situation. "You know, Mom always just handles the steak for Dad and me. She never eats any meat herself. She only drinks water. Dad tells her, 'You're fine with just water.'" "What does that mean?" Was Dad harassing Mom? It seems so, doesn't it? I don't want to believe John would do such a thing, but Joaquin doesn't seem to be lying. "What kinds of things has my husband been doing to me regularly?" The in-laws looked troubled as Joaquin spoke, and the rest of the family was buzzing with agitation. "Hey, Dad, Mom, and everyone. Why are you making such a fuss?" "There's no way I'd do something like that. Joaquin must be mistaken." "Don't take a child's word for it," John said, "but is that really the case?" I hoped it was just a misunderstanding by Joaquin. But with a little kid like Joaquin, might he just be saying what he sees? I didn't want to believe John would do that either. The realization spread, causing a stir. John vehemently denied it, but his excuses that Joaquin was just a child seemed less believable. Seeing the in-laws' reactions and realizing they weren't convinced, John became even more agitated and turned to me. "Come on, Kelly, tell them I haven't been harassing you, right?" His gaze, sharp as a knife, almost seemed threatening. "Oh, don't say anything unnecessary is what you want to say, but it's written all over your face." Normally threatened by my husband, I endured it, so although I immediately understood what he wanted, this time I couldn't back down. I decided to answer his question with a slight tilt of my head. "What? Not harassing? Isn't just giving me ice water on our anniversary a form of harassment or abuse?" "What? Hey, Kelly, what are you saying?" John's expression transformed as if confronted with an unexpected crisis, his face showing panic and uncertainty. Meanwhile, the in-laws and relatives were taken aback by my confession, unable to hide their confusion. Conversation stalled and murmurs spread through the room. "Everyone, calm down. This must be some mistake. Kelly and Joaquin are trying to frame me. If anyone's been harassed, it's me. Believe me." John's attempt to shift the blame to us was astounding, but without proof, I would only confuse the in-laws and other relatives further. Now was the only chance to expose John's true nature. I thought, but I couldn't start talking right away because if I spoke now, Joaquin would hear everything. I didn't want Joaquin to hear, so the first thing was to have him move to another room. Sister, I'm sorry to ask, but could you take Whacken to another room? I have something to discuss that's not suitable for him to hear. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. It must be something very important then. Okay, Whacken, let's go play in another room with Auntie. Yeah, got it, Whacken said, moving obediently with my sister-in-law. With Whacken out of the room, I could now proceed with the conversation with peace of mind. This was the real battle. Thinking this, I took a deep breath to steady my nerves before beginning. Everyone, please watch this video. Once I confirmed that Whacken and my sister-in-law had moved to another room, I took out the laptop I had prepared and showed them a video. The video showed the following scenes. Come on, you didn't even greet me when I came home from work. Haven't I always said to greet me within 5 seconds of me coming home? I'm sorry, I was busy preparing dinner and couldn't leave it. What? Dinner's not ready yet. You're too slow. This was a recording from when John came home from work, but I also showed everyone a video from mealtime. What is this meal? It's too awful to eat. I'll do this with it. Hey, what are you doing? Throwing a meal in the trash is terrible. Shut up. Don't defy me. It's your fault for only being able to make terrible meals. My husband John's verbal abuse was clearly captured in the video. The verbal abuse took place in various locations, and some scenes even matched what Whacken had told his grandmother. Wait a minute. How did you manage to record this video? John was frantic, not knowing he was being recorded. It proved he thought too little of me, assuming I was incapable of doing anything. The things you've done to me were so terrible that I had to install surveillance cameras to gather evidence. As I said this, the in-laws also saw the video and were convinced that my story was true. What's the meaning of this, John? What stupid thing have you been doing? It's just too much. Poor Kelly. Not only that, but you tried to deceive us too. They added, No, this isn't right. Dad, Mom, please calm down. That's right. Kelly is making all this up. John tried to excuse himself, but even at this point, he refused to admit the truth. His excuses weren't believable. The video was too convincing. It's unbelievable that Kelly would fabricate a video. What would she gain from that? Exactly as Dad says, and didn't it also show what Whacken was talking about just now? As the in-laws berated John, the other relatives chimed in with voices of agreement. Damn it, John said, realizing that nothing he said would make a difference. He hung his head in defeat. John, why would you do something like this? His father pressed. John, resigned, began to explain why he had been abusing me. I work for a major company and everyone there holds me in high regard. One day I was entrusted with a big task. John started. That's great, but what does that have to do with abusing Kelly? One of the in-laws asked. Although John's success at work was true, it had nothing to do with his harassment of me. The in-laws looked perplexed as they listened to him. Being expected to perform is fine, but it became too much. I began to feel unable to meet those expectations and was nearly crushed by the pressure. I understand that feeling. You should have talked it over with your colleagues. You're not doing the job alone. Someone said, if I did that, it would seem like I can't handle my job. I didn't want to be seen that way by others. Once I thought about it, I couldn't bring myself to discuss it, and the stress just built up. That's why I took it out on Kelly. She never talked back, and it started to feel good. John's stress built up due to his excessive pride, and because I didn't talk back, his behavior escalated. Just because your work isn't going well, you have no right to hurt Kelly. Another in-law scolded. Releasing stress is necessary, but the way you're doing it is all wrong. You're not just hurting Kelly, but Whacken too. You need to think about how your actions affect your family. That's right. Since you're married, Kelly would have listened to what's been going on with you. Acting so foolishly is truly pitiful, added another. With that, the in-laws scolded John, thinking of me and Whacken. Confronted with how foolish his actions were, John knelt before me and began to apologize. Kelly, I was wrong. There's no one more important to me than you and Wacken. I'm truly sorry for hurting you both, he said multiple times, showing true remorse. John, look up. Kelly, can you forgive me? One of the relatives asked. As I spoke gently to John, he smiled briefly, but then froze, noticing something in my hand. What? That picture? Why do you have that? John's face turned pale as he looked closely at the photo. Mom, Dad, please look at this, I said, holding up a photo of an unknown woman and girl. What is this? Who are these people in the photo? Mom, do you know them? No, I don't know her. Kelly, can you tell us who these people are? They are John's other wife and his child. What? Are you serious? Does that mean John has been cheating? I can't believe this. John, maybe you should have given that premium meat to your other wife and your child, not me. No, Kelly, what are you talking about? Other wife and a child. You're saying some strange things. John desperately tried to laugh it off. The in-laws watched our interaction with stern faces and began to press John for the truth. John, tell us the truth. If this is true, it's unforgivable. Abusing your wife and then a secret wife and child? There's no taking that back. Dad, Mom, what are you talking about? I haven't cheated. Don't jump to conclusions just because of one photo. It was like when Wacken revealed the harassment. John thought he could make us believe it was all a misunderstanding. I needed to make it clear that he was gravely mistaken, so I played my next card. I don't just have one photo of the other wife and child. I have a whole collection. John, can you still deny your affairs after seeing these? Why do you have such photos? John held his head and muttered weakly when I handed them to him, thinking there was no way out. The photos were numerous, showing John happily dining at a stylish restaurant with his other wife, walking arm in arm through the streets, and playing in the park, looking like a real family. I had been suspecting John's infidelity for some time, so I hired a detective, but I never expected to gather this much evidence. Damn it, why did you suspect me of cheating? John must have thought he hadn't been acting suspiciously, confused about why he was caught. He was flustered. Of course, I had reasons for noticing something was off about him recently. John, you've been prioritizing work too much. What are you talking about? That can't be helped. Like I said earlier, I was assigned responsible tasks at work. That might be true, but you were canceling plans with me and Wacken too often. It was as if our plans never existed. That made me suspicious. If he had just valued his time with me and Wacken a little more, I wouldn't have suspected him of cheating and wouldn't have hired a detective. The surveillance cameras were initially installed to catch him cheating. John, you were always cheating while on business trips. That's why the surveillance couldn't catch the cheating, but it did catch your abuse, which was good enough. Damn it! How did it come to this? Everything that had happened was the result of the seeds he had sown. If he had considered what he had been doing all along, he might have realized sooner. But John hung his head as if to say this wasn't supposed to happen. So it really is true that you've been cheating. How much more do you need to hurt Kelly and Wacken before you're satisfied? One in-law asked. With so much evidence gathered, the in-laws and other relatives surrounded John, glaring at him. John, we are disowning you? That's okay with you, right, Mom? Yes, of course, Dad. You said it well. Of course, we should also get divorced. I'll be asking for alimony and child support, so be prepared, I said, following the in-laws. I declared my intention to divorce John. I thought maybe this would make him reflect a little and regret what he had done, but it seems my hopes were too optimistic. Oh, is that so? Then do whatever you like. I'll gladly leave, John said defiantly. Do you even understand what you're saying? I asked, shocked by his attitude. Unbelievably, John was still defiant. I originally intended to use Kelly as a housekeeper. She was quiet and obedient, which made her convenient and easy to manipulate. John confessed. So you only saw me that way? I hadn't expected such a blunt declaration, but strangely, I wasn't as shocked as I might have been. Perhaps I had already sensed John's feelings. Was every time you were nice to me in front of others just an act? I asked. Did you just realize that now? If I prepare top-quality meat for you in front of everyone, they'll think I'm a good husband. I thought you'd be easy to fool since you're so simple. John laughed wickedly. I was truly appalled by his change in demeanor. I plan to divorce Kelly and start over with my new family. I'll work hard for them and make sure I get ahead, John declared confidently. Enough already. How much more do you need to embarrass yourself in front of people? Listening to you is truly embarrassing. The in-laws shouted. The other relatives agreed, some even looking ready to physically confront John. Scary, scary. Say whatever you want. It doesn't bother me one bit. John sneered. He probably thought he could easily pay the alimony and child support and continue his life with his job, other wife, and secret child, but he didn't understand anything. To deliver the final blow, I decided to reveal a fact unknown to John. Unfortunately for you, John, things won't go your way. What are you talking about? Sore losing looks ugly on you, he retorted. It's not about losing. I know your other wife has been deceiving you. What? What are you talking about? What do you know about her? Didn't I tell you I had a detective investigate? It turns out she's been planning to take your money all along. That can't be true. John's complacent smile disappeared, replaced by flustered disbelief. When I met your other wife directly, she said, John is just an ATM. No, that's a lie. We even have a child together. John truly believed his other wife loved him and thought the girl born to them was his child, but there was a hidden fact about that girl John didn't know. That girl isn't your child, John. Your other wife has multiple men, and the child is one of theirs. Shut up. Don't make stuff up. She's not that kind of person. Who are you to say that? Despite neglecting me and Wacken, John still believed strongly in his other wife. In the end, both my husband and his other wife were just two peas in a pod. Why don't you just give up? John, you're being used for your money. How can I believe anything you say? Enough. I'll find out the truth from her, John said, taking out his smartphone to call his other wife. It's a lie, right? He muttered, but the number was not in service. Could it be that what Kelly said is true? I told you I've already looked into it, I said calmly. John struggled to accept the reality, repeatedly trying to call his other wife, but the results remained the same. The calls didn't go through. Damn, the phone won't connect. Looks like I'll have to find her myself. John, wait. It's dangerous to do that. What now? What's so dangerous? Didn't I say your other wife is involved with multiple men? Some of them are dangerous. If they find out, you could be targeted. What? What am I supposed to do then? By this point, John had stopped doubting me. He was trembling in fear, realizing he might be targeted. They might even come to your company. That's bad. The company can't get involved. Come on, Kelly. Help me out. We're married, aren't we? John seemed to finally understand the gravity of the situation and was now asking for my help. But no matter how much he pleaded, I had no intention to assist him. We're getting divorced, so we'll be ex-spouses soon. I have no intention of helping you after you've deceived me, your parents, and all our relatives for so long. And above all, I can't forgive you for hurting Wacken. That's so cold. Dad, Mom, anyone, please, I'm begging you. John pleaded desperately with his in-laws and relatives, but his words reached no one. After looking at each other, his father-in-law firmly told him, I don't know anything about it. I've disowned you. Handle it yourself. This wasn't supposed to happen. John faced the consequences of his actions all at once, completely abandoned by all his relatives and filled with regret. I later heard from the in-laws that to avoid dangerous people, he had to quit his job and started moving from place to place. Sean is apparently managing to make ends meet by working day jobs to pay for the alimony. As for me, I received offers of help from my in-laws and relatives. Hey, Callie, I want to introduce you to a job that would be perfect for you. Would you consider working there? I think it's a good opportunity for you. Thank you so much, but I want to find a job on my own for Wacken's sake too and do my best. After divorcing John, I decided to take a job and raise Wacken. I truly appreciate their kindness, but I can't rely solely on their generosity. I want to do my best on my own for Wacken's sake. It's a step towards changing the weaker version of myself who couldn't muster the courage and just complied with John's demands. There will undoubtedly be many challenges ahead, but I believe that as long as Wacken and I are together, we'll be okay. I have to become a strong mother for him.
Welcome to the family. Adrienne's voice dripped with saccharine sweetness as she handed me a perfectly wrapped gift basket. The smug satisfaction in her eyes betrayed the innocent facade as our gazes met. I managed a polite smile as I accepted the elaborately arranged basket, concealing my unease. Adrienne had made it abundantly clear from the moment I met her that I didn't truly belong in her family's elite social circle. Her chilly disdain was expertly veiled by fake hospitality, but I recognized the game, one she'd perfected over years of keeping up appearances. "Thank you, Adrienne. It's beautiful," I replied, fighting the urge to tear open the gift immediately and expose whatever passive-aggressive jab lay within. My husband Ethan beamed with oblivious pride at my side, squeezing my hand affectionately. He remained blissfully unaware of the tension simmering between his wife and sister. As the baby shower celebrations continued, Adrienne's plastic smile never wavered as she drifted between guests, the picture of graciousness. Yet when our eyes met again across the room, her gaze pierced me like sharpened daggers. Adrienne's unspoken message screamed loud and clear. This was her turf, and I would never be more than an intruder. Steeling myself, I clutched Ethan's hand tighter as we mingled among his family and their well-heeled friends. I kept the gift basket tucked securely in my arms, dreading the carefully selected insult surely wrapped within. Hours later, after the last guest had filtered out, I retreated to the bedroom and pulled off the ribbons with trembling hands. Inside the basket lay an assortment of high-end bath products and a plush terrycloth robe, all blindingly white. At the very bottom, nestled like a viper among roses, was a single sealed envelope with neat cursive script, "Mara's fresh start." My heart plummeted as realization washed over me. Adrienne knew my deepest secret, the painful past I'd fought to put behind me. A past Ethan loved me enough to accept, but one his privileged family would never understand. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope to reveal a check for $10,000 and a brief note, "For when you're ready to walk away and spare us the embarrassment." The message was clear. Adrienne's twisted generosity bought my silence and compliance or ensured my banishment. My mouth went dry as I crumpled the note, panic and rage clashing within me. The game had begun. But this time, I vowed to write my own rules. In the weeks following the baby shower, Adrienne's malicious games intensified. No longer content with subtle digs, she launched an all-out offensive to drive a wedge between Ethan and me. "Mara, darling," she trilled one afternoon, sweeping into the living room uninvited. "I simply had to stop by with this precious outfit for little Emma." She thrust an over-the-top frilly dress into my hands, the lace and bows dripping with saccharine excess. "It's lovely," I managed, forcing a smile. "But really, you shouldn't have." "Nonsense." Adrienne batted her eyes innocently. "Every little princess needs an outrageously impractical gown that she'll hate in a few years." My grip tightened on the offending garment as I bit back a scathing retort. Ethan remained oblivious, offering his sister an indulgent grin. "You spoil her, Addie. What would we do without you?" The words struck like a dagger, highlighting my exclusion from their privileged inner circle. Adrienne's syrupy laugh grated my nerves. "I'm simply providing the essentials that Mara's background seems to be lacking," she purred, inspecting her freshly manicured nails. The thinly veiled insult hung in the air. Before I could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed, and he excused himself, utterly missing the subtext of our exchange. Adrienne pounced the moment he left the room. "Let's be honest, Mara. You'll never fit in here, no matter how hard you try to play the part." Her smile morphed into a condescending sneer. My family deserves better than a child of your circumstances. White-hot anger lanced through me, but I refused to rise to her bait. Adrian wanted me doubting myself, slipping back into old insecurities. Well, two could play at keeping up appearances. Mustering my sweetest smile, I rose to face her squarely. Thank you for the dress, Adrienne. How considerate of you to think of us. I watched with satisfaction as her brow creased ever so slightly, caught off guard by my sugary politeness. Over the following months, I matched Adrienne's passive aggression with sickly sweet gratitude at every turn. Compliments dripping with venom were met with humble acceptance, driving her to escalating levels of pettiness. I picked up this lovely wood varnish for you, she announced one day, thrusting a can of harsh chemicals into my hands. Wouldn't want those habits from your past resurfacing. I simply smiled and thanked her for her thoughtfulness. With each exchange, I could see the confusion and frustration mounting behind Adrienne's meticulously crafted mask. Her twisted games held no power over me anymore. For now, I'd play the role of adoring sister-in-law, but soon enough I'd shatter Adrienne's fragile facade and display her true ugliness for all to see. The reckoning was coming. I would be sure of it. The first prickles of doubt crept in a few weeks later when an anonymous package arrived at our doorstep. Adrienne's carefully orchestrated plans were escalating. What is this? Ethan frowned, extracting a sealed manila envelope from the plain brown packaging. I'm not sure. I trailed off as he tore it open. Inside was a glossy photograph of me exiting a dilapidated building, head bowed against the camera's flash. The place was all too familiar, a sobriety clinic I'd attended years ago after hitting my lowest point. Mara? Ethan's voice was laced with a mix of concern and confusion. What's going on? I felt the blood drain from my face as my gaze flickered to the plain logo embossed on the envelope, a friend who cares. Of course, only Adrienne could concoct such a melodramatic, underhanded scheme. It's from my past, before I got my life together. I swallowed hard, struggling to contain my rage. An old haunt that's better left behind. Ethan slipped an arm around me, his brow furrowed. Why would someone send this? Trying to dredge up ancient history? You'd have to ask your dear sister about that. The words slipped out in a clipped tone before I could stop them. He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. Adrienne, why would you accuse her of something so horrible? Use your eyes, Ethan. I shoved the damning photograph into his hands. Who else would go to such depths to try driving me away? His jaw tensed, but he said nothing. The flicker of doubt in his eyes spoke volumes. In the days after, a heavy pall hung over our home. Ethan avoided the subject, but I could see the wariness in his movements, the questioning glances when he thought I wouldn't notice. Adrienne had planted her seeds of deception, and they were taking root. The breaking point came when I returned home from running errands to find Adrienne's car in the driveway. I braced myself for another round of her twisted mind games. There you are! She bounced out of the front door, all sugary smiles, Ethan trailing behind with a distracted air. I've been simply dying to catch up. Before I could formulate a response, she looped her arm through mine and steered me towards the kitchen. Ethan told me about that dreadful photograph, she stage-whispered with a grimace. I can't imagine who would stoop to such lows. The sickly sweet concern in her voice was a razor's edge against my nerves. Yes, how unfortunate, I responded flatly, pulling my arm from her grasp. I'll be sure to thank them for reopening old wounds. Adrienne's eyes widened in exaggerated hurt. Why, Mara? I'd never dream of inflicting such pain. You know I only want what's best for you and my beloved brother. Her saccharine tone twisted the knife deeper. That's why I've reached out to a dear friend who specializes in personal makeovers, shall we say? I opened my mouth to respond, but she barreled on with the air of one bestowing an act of supreme generosity. Derek will be simply marvelous in helping you put the past where it belongs, behind you. Adrienne smiled with smug satisfaction. Won't that be transformative? That's quite enough, Addie. Ethan's sharp voice cut through her self-congratulations. If Mara wants help, she'll let us know. My heart lurched to see him rallying to my defense. A flicker of uncertainty passed over Adrienne's face, but her mask quickly reset to one of sugary concern. Of course, you're both right. I only want to ease this difficult transition. As she swept towards the door, she tossed one last poisoned barb over her shoulder. After all, we are family now. The door clicked shut with sickening finality. This wasn't a game anymore, it was open warfare, and I had no choice but to fight with everything I had. In the aftermath of Adrienne's latest ploy, I found an unlikely ally in Samantha, one of Ethan's cousins. She sought me out a few days later with a somber expression. "Mara, I need to talk to you about Adrienne." I braced myself, expecting another round of her manipulations. But Samantha surprised me. I know what she's doing. The lying, the sabotage. Adrienne put me through a similar hell a few years back. Her lips tightened into a hard line. I won't let her do that to anyone else in this family. The raw pain in Samantha's eyes stopped me cold. Suddenly, her past falling out with Adrienne made sense. "You've seen her true colors, too," I murmured, realization dawning. Samantha nodded jerkily. The fake smiles, the backhanded generosity, it's all a mind game to her. She can't stand seeing others happy if she's not the center of attention. Her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists as she recounted Adrienne's torment when Samantha got engaged years ago. How the so-called sisterly advice slowly muddled into discreet jabs about Samantha's fiancé's shortcomings. Innocent innuendos that planted seeds of doubt until her relationship collapsed under the strain. By the time I realized what she was doing, it was too late. Samantha whispered, anguish lacing her voice. I lost everything that truly mattered to me because of her malice. White-hot anger lanced through me at the thought of Adrienne's depravity. But I pushed it aside, focusing on the bigger picture. We can stop this, I stated with firm resolve, but we'll need to be smart and ready to fight fire with fire. A glimmer of hope kindled in Samantha's eyes. You have a plan? I nodded grimly. One that will blow Adrienne's twisted game wide open. But it has to be perfectly executed, with no margin for error. Over the next few weeks, Samantha and I constructed an airtight counteroffensive. We documented every one of Adrienne's thinly veiled jabs and assembled a compelling case to present to Ethan's parents. But that was just step one. The real masterstroke involved throwing an intimate family dinner, creating a perfectly staged scenario where Adrienne's vicious true nature would detonate for all to see. No more masks, no more twisted kindnesses masking her malice. As the dinner date approached, I could sense Adrienne's growing desperation in her transparent overtures of bonding over wedding china patterns and baby bronzing ideas. She knew something was afoot, but couldn't pinpoint the source of her unraveling control. The night before, Samantha and I made the final preparations, every potential stumbling block accounted for. Are you ready for this? She asked, eyes blazing with determination. Once we go through with it, there's no going back. I took a deep breath and nodded. More than ready. It's time Adrienne experienced the karma she's had coming for a long time. The next evening, the stage was set. With bright smiles and warm embraces, we welcomed Ethan's family into our home, playing the roles of genial hosts to perfection. Even Adrienne seemed to let her guard down fractionally as she breezed in, her trademark smugness in place. She knew how to work a crowd, a fact I was counting on. As the evening built towards its crescendo, I caught Samantha's eye across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Her grim smile and slight tilt of her glass was all the response I needed. Let the reckoning begin. As the dinner proceeded, the air thickened with tension. Samantha and I exchanged furtive glances, silently coordinating our every move. Adrienne, ever the mistress of performance, remained blindly oblivious to the trap being carefully laid. Mara, darling, you simply must tell me where you found this exquisite china pattern, she gushed, running a perfectly manicured nail along the rim of her plate. The details are just sublime. I suppressed an eye roll at her overwrought theatrics. Oh, just a little something I picked up, I replied with syrupy sweetness. I'm delighted you like it. Adrienne's smile stretched a touch too wide, giving her porcelain features a manic cast. Like it? I absolutely adore it. She turned to address the rest of the table, her voice carrying just an octave too high. Mara has such impeccable taste, don't you agree? A few murmurs of polite agreement rippled around the table. Ethan's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, no doubt registering the undercurrent of tension. I had her squirming now, just as we'd planned. Well, you know me, I demurred with a tinkling laugh. I simply can't resist finding little treasures in unexpected places. Adrian's eyes narrowed infinitesimally at the seeming barb. Samantha caught my gaze and arched a challenging eyebrow. Game on. In fact, I continued in a louder tone, these plates held quite the checkered past before finding their way to me. Confused glances ricocheted around the table, but Adrian remained laser-focused, the tightness around her eyes the only crack in her facade. You see, I pressed on relentlessly, they have a history of being rejected, cast aside by the very people who should have cherished them most. A muscle twitched in Adrian's jaw, but she remained outwardly impassive. Touché. The barbs continued flying in both directions, each phrased with such exaggerated politeness that the others remained oblivious to the underlying battle being waged. Finally, in a stroke of feigned concern, Samantha interjected, "Adrian, I do hope you're not coming down with something. You look quite flushed." The harried desperation was palpable in Adrian's too bright smile now. "Whatever do you mean? I'm perfectly—" "Perhaps it's all this talk of treasures with complicated backgrounds," Samantha crooned with faux innocence. "It can be quite discomfiting for those of us unaccustomed to such acquired tastes." In that moment, something inside Adrian seemed to snap. Her lips peeled back in a rictus snarl as she rounded on me. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat, the venom laid bare at last. "With your second-hand soul and—" The rushed self-editing was too late. Ethan's eyes went wide with shock, and a dismayed murmur reverberated around the table. Adrian froze as if realizing too late the veil had slipped in spectacular fashion. Her gaze swiveled wildly around the stunned, accusing faces staring back at her. With a garbled cry, she shoved back from the table and fled the room, leaving only a ringing silence in her wake. Finally, at long last, the truth was laid bare. I caught Samantha's eye from across the table, and we shared an exhale of grim triumph. The time for judgment had come, and Adrienne was the one found sorely wanting. The silence that followed Adrienne's exit was deafening. All eyes turned towards me, a kaleidoscope of shock, accusation, and dawning realization etched across the faces of Ethan's family. I drew a fortifying breath, letting the weight of Adrienne's unmasking settle over us all. Ethan was the first to find his voice, his expression twisting with a potent mix of anger and disbelief. "Mara, what is going on? What was she talking about? Second-hand soul?" The hurt and confusion in his eyes lanced straight through me, but I refused to buckle under the burden of Adrienne's poison. "It's about my past," I stated, keeping my voice level. "The struggles I went through before finding my way to you." I sent him a pointed look, willing him to understand. Realization flickered across Ethan's features as the unspoken truth, the former addiction I'd confided in him years ago, blazed into the open. His mother paled, grasping the implication immediately. "Adrienne?" she breathed, horror tempering her voice. Surely she didn't. I fixed her with an unwavering stare. "She's been tormenting me for months, ever since she learned about my history." Looks like her mask finally slipped. A tense silence stretched out as the implications sank in. Ethan's father was the first to find his voice, an edge of steel framing his words. Unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. His palm slammed against the table with a resonant thud. "We'll get to the bottom of this immediately." No sooner had the declaration left his lips than a tremulous Adrienne reappeared in the doorway, hastily dabbing at her perfectly made-up eyes with a lace handkerchief, the very picture of an aggrieved victim. I don't know what came over me," she stammered unconvincingly. "The stress of hosting, it all became too much." Despite her theatrical display, something profound had shifted. Her aura of superiority and entitlement was stripped away, leaving only a shrill, flailing desperation in its wake. "Save your hollow apologies, Adrienne," Ethan bit out, his normally affable demeanor replaced by frigid condemnation. "We know about your games, your cruelty towards Mara." Her bravado faltered momentarily, then the fight reignited in her eyes with bitter defiance. "You can't possibly think I'd stand idly by while you destroyed this family's standing by dragging in." Her lip curled with naked disdain. Her kind. A collective recoil spread around the room, but I held my ground, meeting her venomous stare with stoic resolution. There would be no redemption for the likes of Adrian, not after this. That's enough. Ethan's father's voice cut through the tension like a knife, all traces of warmth extinguished. You're clearly too far gone to be reasoned with right now. Adrian opened her mouth, defiance blazing in her eyes, but her father raised a mollifying hand. Don't say another word you can't take back, Adrian. For now, you'll return to your apartment until you can rejoin society with a reality-based perspective. The ultimatum hung in the air like an executioner's blade. For a moment, it seemed Adrian might rally one last poisonous counterattack. Then, just as swiftly, the fight drained from her body, leaving only a hollow, bitter husk. With a wordless hiss, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the door slamming mutely behind her. Silence reigned in the wake of her departure. I could practically sense the years of willful blindness being shed, the blinders falling away from those who'd enabled Adrian's manipulations for far too long. Eventually, it was Ethan's mother who found her voice, weariness etching the lines around her eyes. "Mara, we owe you an apology, a profound one." She shook her head slowly. "We let this ugliness happen, let Adrian run amok for reasons I can't begin to fathom." I opened my mouth to respond, but she pressed on with quiet resolution. "No more excuses. It's time we, as a family, faced the consequences of enabling a monster in our midst." Around the table, solemn nods met her words. At long last, the bitter truth was embraced. A single teardrop traced down my cheek as Ethan's arms enveloped me in a fierce, sheltering embrace. Justice and reckoning had both been served, in more ways than one. Most importantly, I'd been seen. And there was no going back now. In the days following Adrian's explosive unmasking, a palpable shift gripped the family. The sisterly bond between her and Ethan, once ironclad, had been irreparably shattered. All that remained was a haunting void where unconditional loyalty once resided. "I can't believe the depths she stooped to," Ethan murmured, running a hand through his disheveled hair. We were seated in the living room, replaying the events in a numb daze. How could she be so cruel, so evil? I said nothing, simply wrapping my arms around him as he grappled with the harsh reality before us. Ethan's parents entered, their expressions ashen. "We've made arrangements for Adrian," his mother began woodenly. "She'll be staying with your aunt upstate for the time being." Ethan tensed beside me, and I could sense his instinctive urge to protest, to find some thread of redemption to cling to. But his father's next words severed that futile hope. "It's not just us, son. Word is spreading about her behavior." He pinched the bridge of his nose, looking every bit his age. "The Ladies' Society has decided to disassociate from her, effective immediately." A chill lanced through me. The prestigious Ladies' Society wielded enormous social capital and influence. Being ousted was a death knell. "No," Ethan's anguished whisper said it all. He may have finally seen Adrian's toxic truth, but having it blasted across high society was another devastating reckoning altogether. Over the next few weeks, the shunning rippled outward in a withering conflagration. Friends who'd once flocked to bask in Adrian's archly curated aura now froze her out like a leper. Invitations ceased arriving, event attendance dried up, even the slightest interaction was scrutinized by those desperate to distance themselves from the pariah in our midst. The single-minded cruelty that had once been Adrian's calling card was suddenly, viciously reflected back on her tenfold, and she had no one to blame but her own runaway malice. I finally crossed paths with her at the country club one sunny afternoon. She was a diminished shadow seated alone at a remote patio table, shoulders slumped in uncharacteristic defeat. As I approached, her eyes flicked up, and for a fleeting instant I saw the naked hurt and bewilderment laid bare, an ugly truth she could no longer deny. Then just as quickly, the shutters slammed down. Her lips twisted in a snarl of pure unbridled loathing. "Is this what you wanted? To take everything from me? To leave me with nothing?" The venom in her words struck like a physical blow, but this time I refused to recoil. "I didn't take anything, Adrian," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "You brought this on yourself with your jealousy and hatred. This." I waved a hand at the empty, shunned tableau surrounding us. "This is just karma's shadow finally catching up." For a suspended moment, she seemed to teeter on the precipice of impotent rage and a dawning, horrified self-realization. Then her shoulders slumped, the fight visibly leaching out of her. "Just leave me be," she muttered, turning away in hollowed resignation. And with that, I did. because the battle was long over. I'd emerged the decisive victor simply by embracing the resilience and perseverance Adrienne could never comprehend. In the end, her downfall hadn't required any malicious machinations, any shadowy revenge plots. Her increasingly frantic attempts to claw her way back into society's favor only cemented her disgrace further. Like a human supernova burning itself out, Adrienne's hatred had simply consumed her from within. I realized then that closure and vindication had been within me all along. All I'd needed was the strength to let karma run its implacable course. In the aftermath of Adrienne's spectacular downfall, an unfamiliar sense of peace settled over our family. The constant undercurrent of tension, the minefields we'd all tiptoed through for far too long, had finally been diffused. Ethan in particular seemed to stand taller. The weight of his sister's toxicity finally lifted from his shoulders. Our relationship only grew stronger from the shared trauma we'd endured and overcome. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth," he murmured one night as we readied for bed, his arms enveloping me in a tender embrace. "You tried to warn me, but I just couldn't accept how far Adrienne had fallen." I pulled back and met his gaze steadily. "This wasn't your burden to carry alone, Ethan. That's what partnership means, facing the worst of storms together, not just the sunshine." Something shimmered in the depths of his eyes, profound gratitude laced with an abiding love. His kiss spoke volumes as our bodies intertwined in the gathering twilight. In the days and weeks ahead, the renewed bonds with Ethan's parents also blossomed in ways I'd never dared hope for. What had once been a tenuous, artificial connection slowly melted into genuine affection and acceptance. "We should have listened to you about Adrienne from the start," his father admitted one evening over brandy and cigars. "But, well, you know the power of delusion regarding family." I nodded, understanding that all too keenly, but the hurt had faded, replaced by a world of possibility now that the wool had been ripped away. "No more deceptions," I stated, meeting his gaze levelly. "We start over from a place of honesty this time." His returning nod spoke volumes, and with it a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. Even in the wider social circles that had once been Adrienne's playground, our family's standing slowly rebounded. Where she had sown disgrace and alienation, we now reaped the rewards of solidarity and loyalty hard won. At a charity gala weeks later, I found myself pulled aside by the grand dame of the Ladies' Society, the same woman who had cast the irrevocable shunning of Adrienne. "Mrs. Wells," she began with the barest hint of contrition tinging her gravelly voice, "I fear we may have misjudged you upon your arrival into our circle. Scurrilous rumors can be most misleading." She drew herself up, somehow managing to look down her nose at me despite her diminutive stature. "It's clear now that your poise and character were the targets of sabotage from, well, you know the source." Her lips compressed into a grim line. "Words may have been said that cannot be unsaid. Associations questioned that cannot be unbroken." I tensed imperceptibly, bracing for the inevitable slight that seemed destined to follow, but the dame's next words knocked me backward on my heels. "We would be honored if you would consider accompanying us for next month's retreat at the Hampton estate." My breath caught in my throat as I parsed the audacious overture. The Hampton retreat was the most elite, coveted social event of the season, a privilege solely for those ensconced at the upper echelons. To be invited, especially in the wake of the Adrienne fallout, was tantamount to being embraced back into the innermost circle, whole and unquestioned. The message was clear. I'd survived the crucible, emerging untarnished while Adrienne burned away to ash and infamy. Struggling to keep my features impassive, I inclined my head with studied grace. "The honor would be mine, Dame Elizabeth. I accept most humbly." As she bobbed her own regal acknowledgement, a warm sense of triumph bloomed in my chest. Not a retribution or conquest fueled by pettiness, but a hard-won victory over hatred and prejudice itself. This was the new foundation, wrought from adversity and perseverance. And as I turned to rejoin Ethan at my side, our fingers intertwining with unshakable solidarity, I knew our bond would be eternal. For in conquering our harshest demons from within, we'd forged an invincible bastion against whatever storms still awaited on the horizon.